I want you just to think, just for a moment, about some of the biggest years of your life. So when I think about some of the biggest years of my life, I definitely think about 1992. That's the year I graduated from college. It's the year I got my first full-time ministry job. It's the year I got married. A big year in my life. What about you? What are some of the biggest years of your life? Maybe it has to do with getting a job. Maybe it has to do with moving somewhere. 2000, we moved from College Station to Abilene. Monumental year in our life. Yeah, crazy experience there. And so biggest moments of your life. Think about that for a second. The chronicler in 2 Chronicles actually tells us about one of the biggest years in King Josiah's life. It's after he turned 26 years old. He has one of these biggest years of his life. And it started for him with sending some of the leaders into the house of God, the temple, to give some reforms there. Not sure what just happened there. Maybe one of our biggest moments here coming up. So he sent, there we go. We're back on live. Here we go. So he sent some leaders into the temple to do some reforms. And in there they find the book of the law. This is in chapter 34 we talked about last week. They read the book of the law to the king. He humbles himself before the Lord. And the Lord responds to Josiah's humility by giving this great, just gracious promise. And just really worked in his life. And Josiah makes a decision to follow the Lord, to walk with the Lord with his whole heart and his whole soul. And the entire nation of Judah says, we want to follow the Lord with you. And for the rest of his life, everybody decides they're going to follow the Lord. It's an incredible year in his life. And then chapter 35, where we're going to be today, we see how in response to finding the book of the law, Josiah leads the people to celebrate Passover. Now, before we read the chapter dealing with Passover, I want to remind you that Passover is the celebration of God's people. And they're celebrating the deliverance of God. He came into Egypt, and he delivered his people so that they could worship him and serve him and eventually go into the promised land. And that deliverance moment was called Passover, required the blood of a lamb for the angel of the Lord to pass over the houses of those Israelites and to spare them his judgment. So in being delivered from judgment, they might then go to the promised land that he had given them and promised them for decades, generations. And so this celebration was a celebration of God's deliverance, and Josiah is going to lead the entire nation there right in Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. So let's read about that in 2 Chronicles chapter 35. If you don't have your Bible, I encourage you to pick up the Bible there at your pew. You can turn to about page 342 or so and find 2 Chronicles chapter 35. And so I hope you'll read along with me as we read here this chapter. Then Josiah celebrated the Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem, and they slaughtered the Passover animals on the 14th day of the first month. He set the priests in their offices and encouraged them in the service of the house of the Lord. He also said to the Levites, who taught all Israel, and were holy to the Lord, put the holy ark in the house which Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, built. It will be a burden on your shoulders no longer. Now serve the Lord your God and his people Israel. Now what's going on there? Well, if you remember, under his father Ammon and his grandfather Manasseh, they had virtually 6 decades of rebellion against the Lord. And they had brought idols into the house of the Lord, and a lot of stuff had been done there that was just terribly rebellious towards the Lord. And one of the things clearly in this situation was that the ark was removed from the temple. And so the Levites had been taking care of it in some way. And so Josiah is now telling them, take it back into the temple and leave it there. You're not going to have to do what you've been doing. Again, a sign of direction and reform and where they're headed and following the Lord. And so that's what's going on there. Verse 4, prepare yourselves by your father's households in your divisions, according to the writing of David, king of Israel, and according to the writing of his son Solomon. Moreover, stand in the holy place according to the sections of the fathers' households of your brethren, the lay people, and according to the Levites by division of a father's household. Now slaughter the Passover animals, sanctify yourselves, and prepare for your brethren to do according to the word of the Lord by Moses. Now Josiah contributed to the lay people, to all who were present, flocks of lambs and young goats, all for the Passover offerings, numbered 30,000 plus 3,000 bulls. These are from the king's possessions. His officers also contributed a freewill offering to the people, the priests and the Levites. Hilkiah and Zechariah and Jehiel, the officials of the house of God, gave to the priests for the Passover offerings 2,600 from the flocks, 300 bulls. Conaniah also, and Shemaiah and Nathaniel, his brothers, and Hashabiah and Jael and Jozabad, the officers of the Levites, contributed to the Levites for the Passover offerings 5,000 from the flocks and 500 bulls. So the service was prepared, and the priests stood at their stations, and the Levites by their divisions, according to the king's command. They slaughtered the Passover animals, and while the priests sprinkled the blood received from their hand, the Levites skinned them. Then they removed the burnt offerings, that they might give them to the sections of the fathers' households of the lay people to present to the Lord, as it is written in the book of Moses. They did this also with the bulls. So they roasted the Passover animals on the fire according to the ordinance, and they boiled the holy things in pots and kettles and pans, carried them speedily to all the lay people. Afterward they prepared for themselves and for the priests, because the priests, the sons of Aaron, were offering the burnt offerings and the fat offerings until night. Therefore the Levites prepared for themselves and for the priests, the sons of Aaron. The singers, the sons of Asaph, were also at their stations according to the command of David. Asaph, Heman, Jeduthun, the king's seer, and the gatekeepers at each gate did not have to depart from their service, because the Levites, their brethren, prepared for them. So all the service of the Lord was prepared on that day to celebrate the Passover and to offer burnt offerings on the altar of the Lord according to the command of King Josiah. Thus the sons of Israel who were present celebrated the Passover at that time and the Feast of Unleavened Bread 7 days. There had not been celebrated a Passover like it in Israel since the days of Samuel the prophet, nor had any of the kings of Israel celebrated such a Passover as Josiah did with the priests, the Levites, all Judah and Israel who were present, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. In the 18th year of Josiah's reign, this Passover was celebrated. Now that concludes his 26th year of life. So he's 26-year-old. In his 18th year, this is what happens. Begins with a temple reform and ends with this great celebration of Passover. And that was one of his biggest moments. The Chronicle writes about what happened in Josiah's 26th year, because when he was 26, it was one of the biggest moments of his life. Anybody can think about significant moments of life. Not just the moments we remember, but really the moments that are really, really important moments. The moments in our lives that leave a mark on eternity. I mean, that's really what classifies the greatest moments of life as followers of Jesus Christ. Years in our life, moments in life where we actually leave a mark on eternity. I think about those moments in my life and those moments in your life, and I think that we could just look at Josiah's life and say those great moments, the moments that leave a mark on eternity, are moments that are at the very least characterized by the two things we see in Josiah's life. The first we saw in the last chapter, that he made a decision to follow the Lord with his whole heart and his whole soul. See, those are the kinds of decisions that shape the course of your life and shape the course of the world for the glory of God. We talked about that last week extensively. If you weren't here last week, I would so encourage you to listen to that message, to read that chapter 34, and really understand that those kinds of decisions, whole heart and whole soul decisions, are the decisions that really form the greatest moments of our lives. The other characteristic we see here in chapter 35 is Josiah is really involved with the body of believers at Jerusalem in celebrating the Passover, the deliverance of God, and they're experiencing the grace of God. And it's an amazing thing what's happening there in the community of believers. I thought about the greatest moments of my life, the ones that I can look back and say, I can see how God is using that moment to shape my life for His glory and to shape a piece of the world for His glory. I can see His grace being poured out in that moment. I can say that most every one of those moments that I can think of is characterized by either one or both of these things. That I made a decision in that moment to follow Christ my whole heart and my whole soul. And the ripples of that decision just go out into the world for the glory of God. They can look at those moments and I can say, it's either characterized by that or it's characterized by my involvement, my connection to the body of believers. It's some way through the body of believers, God's doing something in my life and through the body of believers to touch the world and change the course of the world for His glory. I just think about those two things and wanting us all to be maximizing those moments in our lives. Those moments where we say, I want to follow you with my whole heart, my whole soul. And those moments where we say, I want to be involved in the body of believers, experiencing the grace of God, celebrating our deliverance. I love this account of Josiah's life, this end bookmark of his 26th year, gives us some insight in what's happening as they celebrate the deliverance of God. There are several things going on here that are really emphasized through the story. One is that those who were able to give, gave generously. I mean, that's the first point of emphasis. You see Josiah given this great number of livestock for the offerings out of his own possessions. And you see all of the officials that are helping him lead give these great gifts. And you see all the Levites and some of the other leaders in the worship experience giving out of their generosity, the ability to give. And they're all giving who can give generously so that everybody experiences the grace of God in celebrating the deliverance of God. The other thing you can see here that's emphasized is that the Levites are working especially hard to enable everyone to experience the Lord. You notice at the end there, it's close to the end of this section, the singers are singing. It says that they didn't have to leave their station. They just got to keep on experiencing the Lord in their giftedness, in their role in the celebration of God's deliverance. They just got to keep on doing it. Why? Because the Levites were over there preparing for them so that they could keep on doing what God wanted them to do, experiencing the grace of God fully, and the Levites are just serving them so they could experience God's presence. Uniquely how they should experience it. I just love this picture of the Levites who are just going about serving everybody. They're serving the priests, they're serving the singers, they're serving the leaders, they're serving everybody, the lay people, so that everybody can experience the Lord. I love that. And the other thing that you see here that characterizes this moment in the body of believers is that everybody in Jerusalem, everybody, is participating at some level. There's nobody just sitting there watching it unfold and not participating. The implication here in this description is that everybody has been enabled to participate at some level in the experience of the grace of God and in celebrating the deliverance of God. And think about those three things that we see emphasized in this scene of the story. And it really just encourages me because it makes me think about what kind of a body of believers does God use to shape the world for His glory. And those are certainly three of the most critical characteristics of that kind of body of believers. Those who are able to give generously. Those who are able to serve so that others can experience the Lord. And every single person under the deliverance of God is participating at some level. Now think about our church. And man, I so long for us to continue to grow, to be a body of believers who is full of people who, when they can give generously, when they can serve to help everyone experience the Lord, and that every single person, everyone, is involved in participating at some level in the body of believers. So you see, when we become a church like that, when we strive to be that kind of a body of believers, there's no question we're in store for some of the greatest moments of life, where God will just use us to experience His grace under the deliverance of Christ, to be a part of shaping the world for His purposes. I mean, I think about 2014, and the significance of this year in the life of our church. Here we are, and we've endeavored to take on this incredible opportunity of Project Thailand. We're sending over, many people from our body, and then everybody is involved. And it's a church-wide effort. You think about, man, those who can give are giving generously. Those who can serve are serving so others can experience the Lord. And everybody is getting involved at some level. And I just think it's one of those moments we're going to see God shape the course of the world for his glory. And there's going to be some of these little cards going to be available up here on the stage or back in the community area after we're done. And I think they're up here in this little basket. Yeah, that's where they are. And these little cards have different ways you can be involved. Like if you're not going and you're praying and you're giving and you're thinking of ways you can serve now to enable others to experience the Lord, each one of these little cards has something on there that you can do to contribute towards the trip. Like some of them are, hey, donate $10 for the supplies needed to carry out the youth camp or to carry out the children's kind of VBS type deal all week. And then there's stuff like you want to buy a set of markers. Buy those markers. Take that card that's you're going to be responsible for. You put those markers in our box. Like we're going to have collection boxes all over the place. And everybody can be involved. This is an opportunity for our entire church to participate at some level. And it's already been happening. Man, it's so exciting to think about what's going to happen as our entire church is involved. You think about Project Impact, how everybody's getting involved in that. I mean, I know that the 30 people that were involved yesterday is just representative of everyone's involvement. So I'm not going to say anything about yesterday's 30 folks being there to try to make any of you feel guilty about not being there, unless you should feel guilty, and then you can certainly read it like that. But I just want you to see it's representative of our church embracing the fact that God's laid this on our hearts to accomplish. And you see people who are able to give generously, see people able to serve so others can experience the Lord, and you see everyone getting involved at some level. When you do that, you touch the world. You know, here in 2 Chronicles 35, we're actually given some encouragement towards that end, so we can see that that's really what's going on. If you notice, look at verses 8 and 9. You're going to see several names there: Jehiel, Conaniah, Shemaiah, Jozabad. You see those 4 names? Do you know that's not the first time we've seen those names mentioned in Chronicles? We saw those names before in chapter 31 under Hezekiah's reforms. Now, those are not the same guys. They'd be like 200 years old or something like that. These are not the same guys. They're guys who have the same name. Now, back in Hezekiah's reform, some 60 plus years before, this is 3 kings before Josiah, there was this great reform, and they celebrated Passover. Very similar thing that's happening in Josiah's day. You remember last week I asked you, how in the world are there guys around to lead reform? The whole nation's been going in rebellion for 6 decades. Where did these faithful men come from? Well, this is some indication right here. See, there were guys in Hezekiah's day with these same names who were leading a reform and experienced the grace of God in the body of believers. And their kids watching their dads lead this reform when they grew up and had kids, you know who they named those kids after? Their granddads. And you know who was there when Josiah came along? In the midst of this darkness in Judah, there were some grandkids who had the namesake of their grandfathers who led reform, who were ready in Josiah's day to lead reform. I wonder if those guys in Hezekiah's day recognized the impact they would have on generations to come just because they are being faithful in the body of believers. You never know. You never know what God will do with your life if you'll make a decision again and again and again to follow the Lord with your whole heart and your whole soul. And you never know what God will do in generations to come if you'll stay connected to the body of believers under the deliverance of Jesus Christ. We have an opportunity to shape the world for the glory of God. If you want to be a part of that, maximize that possibility by making whole heart and whole soul decisions to follow Jesus. And by making sure you stay connected to the body of believers. What I'd like to do right now is I'd like to just end this sermon with this great conclusion that draws you all in and gets you excited about leaving here with that mentality. But unfortunately, that's not where the story ends. And so let's look at the end of Josiah's life here in chapter 35. Verse 20. After all of this, and this is in Josiah's 39th year. Okay, we looked at his 26th year. This was the highlight. Now we're in his 39th year, and look at what happens. When Josiah had set the temple in order, Necho, king of Egypt, came to make war at Carchemish on the Euphrates. And Josiah went out to engage him. But Necho sent messengers to him, saying, "What have we to do with each other, O king of Judah? I'm not coming against you today, but against the house with which I am at war. And God has ordered me to hurry. Stop for your own sake from interfering with God, who is with me, so that he will not destroy you." However, Josiah would not turn away from him, but disguised himself in order to make war with him, nor did he listen to the words of Necho from the mouth of God. But he came to make war on the plain of Megiddo. The archers shot King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, "Take me away, for I'm badly wounded." So servants took him out of the chariot, carried him in the second chariot which he had, and brought him to Jerusalem, where he died, and was buried in the tombs of his fathers. All Judah and Jerusalem mourned for Josiah. Then Jeremiah chanted a lament for Josiah. And all the male and female singers speak about Josiah in their lamentations to this day. They made them an ordinance in Israel. Behold, they are also written in Lamentations. Now the rest of the acts of Josiah and his deeds of devotion as written in the law of the Lord, and his acts first to last, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. Now I want to remind you of two things. Number one, I want you to be reminded that Josiah never turned to the right or to the left in his serving the Lord. Remember, that's what we are told in chapter 34. And what that's encouraging us to see is that Josiah never departed from trusting the Lord and went to idolatry and led the people into idolatry. He stayed faithful to the Lord till the day of his death, never turned to idolatry, and the entire nation followed the Lord as long as Josiah was alive. He never turned to the right or the left. The second thing I want to remind you of is that Josiah was given a promise by the Lord that he would not in his lifetime see the judgment of God be poured out on Judah. The judgment would come. It would not be stopped. Judah was going to be judged, just like Israel, the northern kingdom, was judged. But God said, "I'll not bring it on Judah until you die." All right? Now, historically, there's some things going on in this time frame. Babylon is rising in power. Assyria is going down in power. Egypt is kind of just trying to hang on and figure out what to do. So historically, that's kind of what's happening on the world stage. But God has given Josiah a promise, not until you die will judgment come. Now let's talk about what happens here with Josiah. So he recognizes the king of Egypt is going out to battle some other nation. We're not told what nation it is in the text, but you know historically what's happening. Babylon's increasing in power. Assyria is diminishing in power. Babylon's this growing threat. And so whatever Josiah is seeing that the king of Egypt is doing, Josiah doesn't want the king of Egypt doing. He wants to stop what's transpiring on the historical stage. So Josiah goes out to King Necho and says, "Look, you're not going to do this." And King Necho says, "Look, you better not get in my way, because here's the deal. Your God is with me in this endeavor. And I have to be hasty about getting to where your God is telling me to go. So don't stand in my way. God has told me I'm supposed to do this. And if you get in my way, you're getting in his way, and he will destroy you if you get in his way." And Josiah says, "I'm not listening to you." He goes out and fights anyway, gets shot by an arrow, and then gets put on a chariot, taken back to Jerusalem, and he dies. Now, it's clear that Josiah did not listen when King Necho said, "Don't get in the way." But put yourself in Josiah's shoes. I mean, why would he listen to the king of Egypt? The king of Egypt leads a pagan nation that worships false god after false god. Why in the world would Josiah say, "Oh yeah, Certainly God's going to speak to me through you, pagan king. I mean, it'd be kind of like me going down to the first church of false worship and setting up an appointment with their false teacher, pastor, and saying, hey, I'm really curious about what I should preach the next sermon series. I'm wrapping up 2 Chronicles here next week on Easter Sunday, and I'm just not really sure what to do. I was thinking about maybe you could have some insight for me from the Lord. And the pastor of the first church of false worship says, I really think you ought to preach 1 Thessalonians. Well, I can promise you when I leave that place, I'd be like, I'm not preaching 1 Thessalonians. I mean, it's just hard to blame Josiah for not listening to Necho. That really isn't the fundamental problem here. The real problem is that Josiah wasn't listening to the Lord. You remember the story about Israel going into the promised land, taking out some of the nations along the way, and then the Moabites wanted to prevent their defeat. And so the king of Moab, Balak, he seeks out a prophet to curse Israel. And he finds this guy named Balaam. He says, Balaam, you got to come, you got to curse Israel so we won't be defeated by them because they're wiping out everybody in their path, and we're really scared they're going to wipe us out too. So you come, you curse them, we'll be safe. So Balaam says, look, all I can do is what the Lord tells me. So he gets on his donkey, and he's going to King Balak, and his donkey's going a long way. Then all of a sudden he goes out in this field, and he's like, what in the world? He starts beating his donkey. Get back on the path. The donkey gets back on the path. He's going through this vineyard where the walls are, and he leans up against the wall, and he pins his leg there, and he's like, man, what in the world's wrong with it? Beats that donkey again. He's going down an even narrow way. He can't turn to the right or the left, and he stops right there. He lays down, and Balaam gets off that donkey, starts beating him. What is your problem? And then the donkey talks to him. Hey, why are you hitting me like this? Now, what's even funnier than Balaam's donkey talking is that Balaam actually talks back to the donkey. And he says, well, you've made a mockery of me. If I had a sword with me right now, I would kill you. That's how mad I am at you. The donkey says, it's just funny just even saying it. It's like I'm telling a joke, you know. Then the donkey said, so the donkey says to Balaam, I've been your donkey your whole life. Your whole life. Have I ever done anything like this before? And Balaam's like, whoa, wait a minute. And then his eyes are open and he sees that there was an angel of the Lord standing in the way, and the donkey saved his life. Because the angel of the Lord would have killed Balaam had he gone forward. The donkey was like the last resort. There were indications all along the way there was a problem. Nothing had ever happened like this before, and here it was happening, and Balaam should have been paying attention to the Lord, but Balaam was set in his ways. He'd already made up his mind. He had determined what to do. He's no longer consulting the Lord. He was not thinking about what the Lord wanted. He was doing his deal, went about his business. Something weird happened. He's not even thinking the Lord's in this. There's no way the Lord could be involved in this. How could the Lord be involved in this? This is just a bad donkey story. And then the donkey spoke. Balaam listened. When the king of Egypt spoke, Josiah didn't listen. And I just wonder how many times from the moment Josiah was shot with an arrow, and he rides back on that chariot all the way to Jerusalem. He's sitting there in Jerusalem waiting to die. I wonder how many times from the time he was shot to the time he died that he had this thought going through his mind. I should have listened to the Lord. He's always guided me. He's always taken care of me. Why didn't I recognize what was happening on the historical stage? He told me that judgment was coming. I see what's happening with Babylon. There's prophecies that have been being made about Babylon. Why didn't I ask the Lord? Why didn't I listen to the Lord? I should have listened to the Lord. And I think about how Josiah ended his life. And I just think about my own life. I think about your life. And I just want to minimize those moments in life where we say, I should have listened to the Lord. I mean, you know how that feels. You're just like me. You've had those moments. I've had more of those kinds of moments than I care to repeat or talk about. And when I look at particularly you college students and you young couples, young adults in here, man, I so long for you to get to where I am, to where some of even the older people in our church are, and to look back on life and see very few of those moments that you say, I really should have listened to the Lord. You know how you can minimize those kinds of moments? Those I should have listened to the Lord moments? By maximizing the moments of your life where you make whole heart and whole soul decisions to follow Jesus. By staying connected with the body of Christ and really getting involved in the grace of God in the context of body believers. You know, what if Josiah had listened? What if he'd listened to the Lord? He wouldn't have gone out and fought Necho, right? He would not have done that. But don't for one second think that does not mean he would not have died. Judgment was coming. It was only a matter of a couple months before judgment begins to unfold on Judah. And within 11 years, it is full blown. So don't think that if Josiah would have listened, he would not have died. Here's what you need to realize. If Josiah had listened, he would have died knowing, I have listened to the Lord, instead of died knowing he should have listened to the Lord. I just hope that you'll be encouraged by Josiah's life to keep making whole heart and whole soul kinds of decisions to follow the Lord, to stay plugged into the body of believers that experiences the grace of God, that shapes the course of the world for the glory of God. And you would just minimize through that these moments where you say, I should have listened to the Lord. Those moments are devastating. Incredibly sad for Judah. I mean, they were singing about it for years and years and years to come. Jeremiah the prophet sung about the sorrow of losing Josiah. It grieved them to see them lose this king. And I wonder if when Jeremiah said some of the things he said, if he was thinking about Josiah, I wish it could have been different. I wish we could have had something better than what we had. I wish we could have had something better. It was Jeremiah who said this. Listen to this. If you want to read along, you can turn to page 562 in the Pew Bible there. But it says Jeremiah chapter 31. And Jeremiah chapter 31 says, this is Jeremiah, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days. I will put my law within them, and on their hearts I will write it, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. They will not need teach again, each man his neighbor, and each man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. Jeremiah saw the fall of his king, but he knew a better day was coming. A day when God would forgive forever his people, and they all would know him and be able to walk with him with a whole heart, a whole soul. What day was he looking for? Look at chapter 33, verse 14. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will fulfill the good word which I have spoken concerning the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In the days at that time, I will cause a righteous branch of David to spring forth, and he shall execute justice and righteousness on the earth. In those days, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will dwell in safety. And this is the name by which she will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. We live in that day when Jesus has come, he has died on the cross, he has paid for our sins, he has risen again, is at the right hand of the Father waiting to come and rescue his bride. We live in the day of the new covenant, the day in which God has fulfilled his promises, the day in which we are now waiting for the King to return to rescue us and to make everything that's wrong right. We live in the day where Jesus Christ has sent his Spirit to indwell us so that now we are the temple of the Lord, not this place, but as a follower of Jesus, we are indwelt by the Lord so we can do something better. We can maximize whole heart and whole soul decisions because the Spirit of God resides in us by way of the King of Kings. We can have those moments in life where we connect with other believers whose name is He is our righteousness. And we can together pursue Jesus Christ with everything we are and minimize the moments in life where we say, I should have listened. That's amazing. Did you know that Jesus told us, Matthew chapter 24, read it. Jesus told us that the days in which he plans to return are days that you don't think he will return. It's like a perfect storm for I should have told you moment. I should have listened moment. But Jesus tells us so we can be ready. And he gives us his Spirit so we can be ready. And someday, Jesus will return. And if we will be a people who just keep on making whole heart, whole soul decisions, and keep on staying plugged into the body of believers, rescued by grace, you know what's going to happen when Jesus returns? He's going to find us ready. And I promise you, that will be the greatest moment of your life.